Okay, I think we can start. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome back to this weekend shamatha retreat titled Mindfulness of Breathing. So of course, the schedule for today will be the same as yesterday. So we'll have 4 sessions, each one an hour 15 with a 30-minute break and then a 1-hour break at lunchtime. The format of the sessions will be the same. We'll begin with a meditation, then there'll be a presentation, another meditation, and then finishing with Q&A. So once again, until we do the Q&A, then switch off your webcam and your mic. And then if you have a question at the end, then you can switch on webcam and mic to ask the questions. So let's have a look at what we're going to do in this session. But before we do that, of course, let's begin with a meditation. And we'll continue the practice that we left off with yesterday afternoon. That is the mindfulness of breathing practice, focusing on the area of the abdomen. So remember, the object here is the tactile sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. And with this practice, we are emphasizing stability of attention. But remember to keep that basis of relaxation, to not tighten the focus. So keep the basis of relaxation and then focusing on the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. And again, if you find that you're getting distracted a lot and you found it helpful to count the breath, then you can bring that in as well. So let's do that practice first, and then we'll have a look at what we'll be covering in this session. So once again, finding a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. And as you're settling into a good posture, then setting a good motivation for today, for the sessions for today. And as an act of loving kindness for yourself, then allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And using the out breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Relaxing more deeply with each out breath. Softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And if you find it helpful, you can take 3 slow, deep breaths, maintaining awareness of sensations throughout the body as you breathe. And then allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply get out of the way and let the body breathe itself naturally. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. Happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest. To rest in the stillness of the present moment. And then from that stillness, start to become aware of the sensations of the breath in the area of the abdomen. Noticing the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. And monitoring that mindfulness with introspection. Noticing if you're falling into dullness or distraction. And then reapplying mindfulness as necessary. and introducing some counting of the breath to help stabilize the attention if necessary, and if you find it helpful. So we can bring the meditation to a close. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this session. We'll begin with a review of some of the main points from yesterday. Then we'll look at the actual practice for this session, which is going to be, again, a mindfulness of breathing, and this time focusing on the rhythm of the breath. And so then we'll follow that with a 15-minute guided meditation on that practice. And after the meditation, we're going to look at the stages of progress in shamatha. So that was that windy chart, that the windy road on the chart that we looked at briefly yesterday, and hopefully you've all got a copy of that, and we'll have a look at some of those stages after the meditation, and then time for some question answer at the end of the session. So this weekend's retreat is called a shamatha retreat. And so remember, we saw that shamatha was a Sanskrit term that when Buddhism first spread from India, it spread through two languages, through Sanskrit and Pali. And so very often when we're talking about various concepts and practices, then it can be very helpful to go back to Sanskrit terminology, because the Sanskrit terms are very precise. Whereas when they're often translated into English, sometimes there's not really a good word in English that has that meaning, and then we get a little bit confused about what we're talking about. So often I do that. I'll go back to Sanskrit terms, particularly ones that are more commonly used in the Buddhist context even today. So shamatha is commonly used, I think, and shama, the first part of the word, it means calm, a mind that is calm, not discursive. Ta means to remain or abide. And so often shamatha is translated as calm abiding. So we're talking about not only a mind that is calm, but that is abiding, i.e. focused single-pointedly on an object. So shamatha is the practice of cultivating a calm, clear, and focused mind. So it's what's called a concentration practice. In Sanskrit, that the word for concentration is samadhi. And in Theravada Buddhist traditions, when they talk about concentration practice, you won't normally see this word shamatha. You'll rather see the word jhana. And jhana is just another level of concentration. So they're both the same practice, but two different words for the same practice. Why is this shamatha practice important? We saw there yesterday that in terms of at everyday life level, shamatha practice is going to help us to improve our attention skills. And of course, the better our attention skills are, then the more effective we'll be in everything we do in our life. We'll have much better mental balance. And instead of being the slaves of our mind, we'll become the masters of our mind. And also there tends to be some health benefits. We tend to have better sleep, and sometimes physical health improves as well due to this sort of practice of just simply improving our attention skills. Because we find that some of the modern day illnesses come from an imbalanced mind, a mind that's caught up in a lot of negative states of mind, and that manifests in the body. And so with the shamatha practice, this is very much a healing practice. It really helps to balance the mind and overcome these sort of illnesses that are coming from an imbalanced mind. But then we saw also that this shamatha practice is very important in the pursuit of happiness. And here we were talking, of course, yesterday about the pursuit of genuine happiness, a state of inner well-being. We saw there that in the various Buddhist traditions, it really comes down to three core areas of practice that we need to cultivate if we are to find this genuine happiness, this well-being. The first, on the basis of ethics, avoiding harmful behavior. Then on that basis, we engage in the concentration or shamatha practice to develop that calm, clear, focused mind. And then on that basis, we engage in the wisdom of Vipassana practice to gain an insight into the nature of reality. Because again, the Buddhist assertion is that the underlying source of all mental afflictions and suffering is our distorted view of reality. And if we want to overcome that, we need to gain a direct insight into reality. And to be able to gain a direct insight, the basis of that, we need a very calm, clear, focused mind to be able to fully penetrate the nature of reality. So therefore, we see that shamatha is really the basis of Vipassana. And that if we really want to find that genuine happiness and inner well-being, then the shamatha practice is very important, is crucial. And so we saw that quote there from Attention Revolution, the recommended reading from Alan Wallace, where he says, mental balance is the gateway to finding genuine happiness, and shamatha is the key that opens that gate. And how to train in this shamatha, we saw the various elements. The first is to have what's called preparation or a framework for the whole practice. What that sort of looks like a little bit, we're going to look at in the third session today, or in session 7 for the weekend. Within the meditation practice, of course, we began with looking at the preparation, preparing body, speech, and mind. In the actual meditation, the 3 qualities of relaxation, stability, clarity, and objects, breath, mind, and awareness, the 3 that Alan Wallace particularly recommends for us in the modern world. And each one of those 3, I think, has really unique benefits for us in the modern world. Tools, mindfulness and introspection, 2 main tools. We'll look at those again shortly. And those 5 faults and 8 antidotes. Again, we'll look at that again a little bit later. And then, of course, with any practice, then not only do we meditate to internalize, but we need to bring it into daily life, how to integrate in daily life. And so we'll be looking at that in the last session today. And in this session, after the meditation that we're about to do, we'll be looking at the stages of progress in the practice. Because in any practice, it would be helpful to not only know what is the goal of the practice, but what is the roadmap or the stages that we go through, so we can see how far we've developed in the practice, and are we going in the right direction, or have we gone astray in the practice? So we'll be looking at a classic model there in describing the stages of progress in shamatha practice a little bit later in this session. So again, the preparing body, speech, and mind, preparing the body to set up the good posture, be relaxed, keep the back straight, and keep the body as still as possible. And then the allowing the breathing to settle in its natural rhythm. This is coming as part of preparing speech. And there was a question, I think, yesterday about what's really the difference here? Shouldn't this really come under the context of preparing the mind? Because this was to do with letting go of negative states of mind is one of the things. And here I think the preparing the speech is a little bit of a bridge between the body and the mind, is that not only by allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm, is that going to help with relaxing the body, but also we find that the breath is very closely tied to the mind, and that once the breathing settles down, the mind tends to settle down as well. And what we find actually in Tibetan Buddhism, there's this analogy of what's called a wind horse. And this is to do at a more subtle level, but it can be applied here, is that at a subtle level, we have subtle energies in the body, and which more subtle levels of our mind are sort of connected to that. They're like the rider on a horse. So the horse is like the energies, that, i.e. the wind horse, the energy horse, and then the mind is riding on that horse. So they sort of go together. And so similarly at the sort of surface level here, and we know this from our own experience, is that the breath and the state of mind are very closely related, that the more the breath settles down, the more the mind tends to settle down. And the more that the mind gets agitated, the more that the breathing gets coarse and unsettled. And so therefore, here is an intermediate step, into really settling the mind, if we can just simply allow the breathing to settle down into its natural rhythm, already the mind is starting to calm down. And then from that basis, then at a more deeper level, we can really prepare the mind well, in the mind in a very relaxed state, bringing it into the present moment. And as we saw yesterday, that it's very important to prepare well for meditation. Sometimes people don't even go through this preparation. We just sit down and we start meditating, and then people wonder why their meditation's not going very well. This is a little bit like if we want to run a 100-meter sprint without warming up. I think that's not going to go very well. So similarly here, we need to warm up, we need to prepare well, and take as much time as you need. Some sessions you may be able to prepare very quickly, other sessions you may need to take more time, but just take as much time as you need. It's time well spent. Prepare well, and then that you have a much better basis for the actual meditation session. Here in shamatha practice, we saw that there are 3 qualities to cultivate: the qualities of relaxation, stability, and clarity. And here we saw that each one of those is really the basis of the next. That initially the emphasis is on relaxation, and then the more relaxed we are, the more effectively we can develop stability. The more stable our mind is, the more effectively we can cultivate clarity, using that tree analogy. And again, I can't overemphasize the importance of relaxation, particularly for us in the modern world who tend to have very hectic, fast-paced lives, a lot of agitation and stress in our lives. Our minds tend to be very chaotic, and we tend to bring this into meditation practice, very agitated, a lot of agitation and tension. And so the first thing we need to do is really release that and have this basis of relaxation to be able to sustainably cultivate stability and clarity. In terms of the objects, in this retreat, we're using the breath, or mindfulness of breathing, as it's sometimes referred to. And I think for many of us, this is probably going to be the best object to use for shamatha practice, particularly initially in the practice, because it's relatively easy to focus on compared to some of the other objects. It's readily available, and it really helps us to get out of our obsessive compulsive thinking mind that many of us have in the modern world, and to get really into the body. We've often lost touch with the body in the modern world. And so therefore we're going through these variations of the breath practice, the full body breath practice for relaxation we looked at yesterday. Also, the abdomen practice is very good for stability. And today in the next session, we're going to look at the focusing at the entrance and nostrils. And then the other 2 objects that we'll be looking at in the next retreat in 3 weeks' time is observing the mind and resting in awareness. And they also have enormous benefits for us in the modern world. So let's now go to the actual practice that we're going to do in this session. So before we go to the nostrils, the next variation of the breath practice, the mindfulness of breathing, let's do a very similar practice to the full body breath practice. That was the one we did initially, to just notice the sensations of the breath anywhere in the body. And this was particularly good for relaxation. So very similar to this is to simply notice the rhythm of our breath. Just to simply notice if our breath is long or short, deep or shallow, slow or fast. And so simply just noticing the rhythm of the breath. And so again, this is a very diffuse object, because we'll need to notice the various sensations to pick up whether our breathing is long or short, deep or shallow, slow or fast. And so of course here, noticing the rhythm of the breath, as we saw yesterday, there can be a tendency then to control the breath. If we notice that our breath is very fast or very long or or it's not so, or it's very shallow or deep. We may think we need to make it more rhythmic, we need to make it more shallow, we need to slow it down, and so forth. So there can be a tendency to manipulate the breath in this practice. So if you notice that you're wanting to control the breathing, just let that go, let it go, let it go, let it go. So this practice, like the full body breath practice, is very conducive for relaxation. And also it's very conducive as an anchor for other practices and in daily life. And this, using this as an anchor, is something that we're going to be doing in the next retreat, when we'll be observing the mind and resting in awareness. We'll bring this particular variation of mindfulness of breathing in there as an anchor point to help us to get into those practices. So it's very helpful here to become very familiar with this practice. And also, since this, like the full body breath practice, is very conducive for relaxation, then this practice can be also done, can be very helpful to do this practice in the Shavasana posture. So if you want to do this meditation now in the Shavasana posture, feel free, if you have that available nearby where you are. Particularly if you find it difficult to release the tension. If you really find it quite difficult to relax, then try the Shavasana posture with this meditation. And then, of course, we brought in those key words, what to do in case of dullness and distraction. We saw there yesterday that if we become distracted, first thing to do is simply relax, to avoid tensing, to then release the distraction and very gently return to the breath without clamping down more forcefully. And if we're falling into dullness or drowsiness, then refresh our interest in the practice, restore our attention on the breath, and then retain that ongoing flow of mindfulness. And so once again, in this practice, we are emphasizing relaxation. So the out breath is a very conducive time to really work on the relaxation, that on the out breath to really relax and release any tightness and tension in the body, and on the out breath, releasing any thoughts that may have arisen in the mind. But of course, as we're relaxing, not to allow the mind to sink into dullness and drowsiness, to maintain the level of clarity that we began the practice with. So let's do that practice now. So if you'd like to find a nice comfortable posture, let's do that practice. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. and setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest. Resting in the present moment. Resting in stillness. And from this stillness, start to become aware of the rhythm of your breath. Noticing if it's long or short, deep or shallow, slow or fast. Without trying to modify it in any way. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the rhythm of the breath. And so we can bring the meditation to a close. Now we're going to look at the stages of progress in the shamatha practice. So this is two handouts that hopefully each of you have got a copy of. If not, we'll have some slides with the information on it anyway. And that windy path in the diagram you see there, that is showing this sort of classic presentation of the stages to shamatha. It's a 9-stage model. And then a lot of that information then is put onto that chart to the side of that. So let's have a look at this. In particular, we're going to look at now the first 4 stages. And that's what's mainly relevant to us at this level of practice of shamatha, these first 4 stages. Some practical advice about practice and how we're going in our practice. So there we saw yesterday, I think already, we saw this quote which said, shamatha is attained by progressing through the 9 stages, relying on the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. So we looked at those 5 faults and 8 antidotes yesterday already. And it says this is accomplished through the 6 powers and the 4 mental engagements. So here we have listed the name of the 9 stages. The 6 powers are the sort of bendy parts of the road, and that power is what enables us to get to the next level of the practice. So we have those 6 powers there. And the 4 mental engagements is about how we are engaging the object. What is the quality of our engagement in the object? So let's begin by having a look at the first stage of practice called directed attention. Here already we've seen a few points from yesterday. We see the meditator here. Remember, in the 2 tools from the meditator, in the left hand of the meditator is the rope of mindfulness, and in the right hand is the hook of introspection. So they're the 2 tools we use. And we mentioned yesterday that the elephant is the mind. The fact that the elephant is black is symbolizing dullness or laxity. The monkey here is symbolizing discursive conceptual thought in general. And the fact that it is black is symbolizing this excitement, the most common form of distraction. And so what we see here at this first stage, called directed attention, is that the elephant and monkey are running wildly ahead of the meditator. So we basically see that our mind is out of control. And what we achieve at the first stage of practice, here it says, one is able to direct the attention to the chosen object. And this means for even just a second or 2. So if we can focus on the object just for a second or 2, we've already reached the first stage. Of course, if our object happens to be some sort of complex visualization, that may take quite some time to achieve the first stage. However, using the breath here, then I think many of us, of course, very first time we do this breath practice, we can achieve the first stage, just focusing on the breath for a couple of seconds. And we do that, the power with which we achieve that first stage is what's called hearing, or learning the instructions. So to achieve the first stage, of course, we need to hear about the shamatha practice. We need to listen to what are the instructions, what are we to do, and then we apply those instructions, and we can achieve this first stage. But of course, we have a lot of problems here persisting at the first stage. And here it says there is no attentional continuity of the object. So therefore, what we see or we notice in our practice is that we focus on the object, and here we're using the example of the breath. We focus on the breath maybe a couple of seconds, and then we get distracted. And we're distracted for long periods of time, often minutes. And then at some time later, we go, oh, hang on, I'm supposed to be focusing on the breath. And we come back and we focus on the breath again for another 2 or 3 seconds, and then off we go again on our story. So that's what it means by no attentional continuity on the object. We're barely on the object at all. Now, when we have this experience, then often what happens is people go, I can't meditate. I just can't meditate. In fact, I think I must be doing something wrong because my mind now is definitely worse than before I started meditating. Before, my mind was seemed to be sort of okay, but now since I've started meditating, it's completely out of control. So not only can't I meditate, I must be doing something wrong. If this is your experience, don't worry, you can meditate. In fact, here, the very first sign of practice is this, is just to see how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. Because if we've never done this practice before, we may have this illusion that my mind is sort of okay. You know, I get a bit dull and distracted, but focusing on the breath, well, that can't be too difficult, can it? And of course, when we sit down and try to focus on the breath, and then usually after a couple of seconds, we're completely distracted for long periods of time, that's the conclusion we come to. So if this is your experience, good work. You've made the first step. You're making progress. The first step is simply noticing how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. We can hardly hold the object for more than a couple of seconds. So therefore, here in terms of imbalances, the main imbalance is coarse excitation. Coarse excitation means we're completely distracted from the object. So that is one of the main imbalances here, is we're just completely distracted from the object for long periods of times. Then this mental engagement here says focused. What that means is to engage in the object, we have to keep refocusing the mind on the object because most of the time we're completely distracted. So we need a lot of effort to just focus on the object. And so the quality of our experience here, it says, is movement. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of distractions. Our mind is moving all over the place. And so therefore, the analogy often given here is involuntary thoughts that come up in the mind is like a cascading waterfall, is that there's one thought after the other crashing down in our mind all the time, getting swept away constantly by our thoughts. So that is the first stage of practice, directed attention, where we can really just hold the object for a couple of seconds and then we're distracted for long periods of time. But if we keep practicing, then we'll go around the corner of this road to the second stage called continuous attention. And so what we notice here is that the elephant and monkey are not running so fast anymore. And there's a little bit of white on the top of the head of the elephant and the monkey. And this is symbolizing a little bit of stability and clarity. So what we achieve at the second stage, which we didn't have at the first stage, is we have some continuity on the object. We can hold the object a bit longer, maybe up to a minute or two, but we're still distracted for long periods of time. And the power with which we go from the first to the second stage is contemplation, reflection, to think about the practice, to think about the instructions of the practice, to understand the practice better, to become more enthusiastic about the practice, and then we can go a little bit deeper into the practice and get to this second stage. Now, the problems that persist here at the second stage is that we're still distracted for quite long periods of time. So most of the time, we're still not on the object. We're more distracted than we are on the object. And so therefore, the main imbalance here, like the first stage, is still coarse excitation. We're still completely distracted from the object for long periods of time. And therefore, the mental engagement is still what's called focused. We still need to put a lot of effort to focus on the object, keep focusing on the object, because we're mostly distracted. And so the quality of our experience is still one of movement, lots of thoughts everywhere. And so the analogy again here, it's like a cascading waterfall of thoughts crashing down on our mind. So that's the second stage. And if we keep practicing, then we'll go around the corner to the third and fourth stage. And the third and fourth stage, this straight bit of road here, is achieved through what's called the power of mindfulness. So now at stage 3 and 4 of the practice, our mindfulness is getting a lot better. And we see that the rope of mindfulness is now tied to the elephant of the mind, signifying that mindfulness is getting a lot better. And so what we achieve at the third stage is that when we get distracted, we now quickly recognize that distraction and come back to the object. So we are mostly on the object, whereas at the second stage, we were mostly off the object. And the fact that we recognize the distraction more quickly and quickly come back is symbolized by the elephant turning the head backwards, meaning we're coming back to the object very quickly. And we achieve this through improved mindfulness. The problem that still persists is that you still sometimes completely forget the object, but now for only brief periods of time. So that still persists. We still get distracted for brief periods of time. So therefore the main imbalance is still coarse excitation, where we get completely distracted from the object, but now only for brief periods of time. But now the mental engagement is what's called interrupted, because now we're mostly on the object. So therefore we're on the object most of the time, but now and again we're interrupted by dullness or distraction. And so that's what interrupted engagement means. We're mainly on the object, but interrupted a little bit by dullness or distraction. So therefore the quality of the experience is still one of movement. So there's still quite a lot of things going on in the mind. And so still like a cascading waterfall of thoughts, but we're not pulled away by them as much as we were earlier. Now, one other thing we see here is at stage 3, which is called resurgent attention, is there's the monkey on, the rabbit on the back of the elephant. And the rabbit is symbolizing subtle laxity or subtle dullness. So from this stage on, it's important to pick up this subtle dullness, because if we don't, we'll sort of get stuck here. Because by stage 3, we're mostly on the object. If we get distracted, we quickly come back. And so we may have this illusion that, I'm quite advanced already. I think I must be getting very close to shamatha already, because I'm pretty well most of the time on the object and only get distracted for brief periods of time. But of course, what's missing is quality of attention. Particularly, our mind is not very clear. Our mind is sinking. And that little bit of sinking is the rabbit. We have to pick up that the mind is sinking a little bit and sharpen the mind a bit. And so that is stage 3. And then if we go to stage 4, which is called close attention, so again, this power of mindfulness, now our mindfulness is getting a lot better. And now we can hold the object the entire session without ever completely losing it. So our mindfulness is getting a lot better. And so that's what we achieve at stage 4, which we didn't have at stage 3. Stage 4, we can hold the object the entire session without ever completely losing it. Now, what problems persist here is, therefore, there can creep in some degree of complacency regarding samadhi, regarding this practice, because now we can hold the object the entire session and we can get a bit complacent thinking, well, I can focus on the object the entire session. I never get distracted. I think I'm nearly at shamatha actually. And so we get a bit complacent, but still we have a lot of work to do on the quality of our attention. And so here we see now the imbalances are what's called coarse laxity. Again, the mind is sinking, and what's called medium excitation. Medium excitation is where we don't get completely distracted. However, there's still a lot of stuff going on in the mind at the same time as focusing on the breath. In fact, medium excitation is that you can be mostly caught up in some other mental events, some thoughts, and just a little bit in the corner of your mind, you're still focusing on the breath. And so you might think, I can focus on the breath and think about other things at the same time. Well, actually, technically, we can't. What's happening there, even though there's an illusion that we're focusing on the sensations of the breath and thinking about things at the same time, what's happening in reality is that over a brief period of time, we are moving backwards and forwards very quickly between the breath and the thought to give the illusion that it's simultaneous. So what is the reality is that our attention is very much fragmented, meaning the quality of our attention is still quite poor, even though we don't completely lose the object. So the mental engagement here is still interrupted, meaning we're focusing well on the object, but interrupted a little bit with laxity and excitation. But now the quality of our experience, because we never get distracted from the object at all, then we have a sense of achievement, that we don't really feel like a beginner in shamatha practice anymore. We have some sense of accomplishment, that we're actually getting somewhere in the shamatha practice. And now the mind starts to quieten down as well. We don't have so much mental activity going on. So rather than a waterfall of thoughts crashing down on us, it's more like a river flowing through a gorge. So still quite a lot of things going on there in the background, but not as intense as before. But still, we have a lot of work to do in shamatha practice. But that's all I wanted to really cover in this session here, these first 4 stages, because they are the ones mostly relevant to us at our level of practice. The higher levels we'll briefly look at in the next retreat in 3 weeks' time, because actually some of the instructions there are more relevant to the practice that we'll be doing in the next retreat. So that's all I wanted to cover in these first 4 stages. Here we have these imbalances. Actually, I won't really go through these. You can look at these yourself later. In terms of this excitation and laxity, maybe actually I'll just briefly mention. So 2 imbalances, dullness, distraction, or excitation and laxity. Coarse excitation is where we get completely distracted. The medium level of excitation is that we start to get pulled away by something, but we're still hanging on to the breath a little bit, but mostly we're focusing on something else, and a little bit we're still attending to the object, to the breath. Whereas subtle excitation is the opposite, where we're mainly focusing on the breath, and a little bit in the background, things are starting to pull our attention a little bit, but we're holding mainly on the breath. Whereas laxity, coarse laxity, is where the mind is sinking a lot, even to the point where we completely lose the object because we're sunk too much or get quite heavy. Medium laxity is where the object is there, but there's not much vividness or clarity. And very subtle laxity is where the object is quite clear and vivid, but our attention is a little bit slack. It's not crystal, it's not sharp. And so these are levels of laxity and excitation that we go through in these 9 stages. Of course, at the beginning stages, it's coarse laxity and coarse excitation that are the main issues. But as we get through the higher levels, then we have more and more subtle levels of this excitation and laxity to deal with. But that comes much later. So that's all I wanted to cover in this session. So we've still got a little bit of time left for question and answer. So if there's any questions from any of the topics from this session, switch on the webcam and the mic and ask away.
Glenn?
Yes?
Good morning, it's Anne.
Good morning. Anne, is it?
I missed there was a trouble with the internet connection, so I didn't get the explanation from the beginning. Could you tell me what's the role or the symbol of the monkey in the diagram, in the stages of the 9 stages? And then that's one question. And the other question is, on the 4th stage, the rabbit is half white.
Yeah. Meaning that, okay, the first question is the rabbit, the monkey. The monkey is symbolizing discursive thought in general, and the black color is symbolizing this excitement, the most common form of distraction. The rabbit is symbolizing subtle laxity or subtle dullness. And the fact that it's going from progressively black to white means we are slowly overcoming more and more subtle levels of laxity. And if you've got the diagram there, the whole diagram, you'll see that by stage 6, the rabbit is gone.
Yeah.
Meaning that now that we've really been able to deal with quite subtle levels of laxity, we can notice it and it's not a problem anymore. But over these middling stages, stage 3, 4, 5,
right.
This is where we're fine-tuning the focus more and more and more.
Okay. And the link.
But the higher levels where we're the rabbit goes and we say goodbye to the monkey and there's no more black on the elephant, we see that progressively happening, more white, less black, and then the rabbit and the monkey go around stage 6, 7, 8, 6, 7. And so
Right.
that's something we're going to look at in the next retreat. So we'll be looking at the second half of this diagram in 3 weeks' time when we are covering the observing the mind and resting and awareness practice. So we'll look at those there. So yeah.
And the link with the fruit and the silk and
Yeah, so remember then the most common form of distraction is excitement. We're pulled away by the so-called sense pleasures. And
right.
so those are representing the 5 sense objects. The
Okay.
fruit was taste, the
Yeah.
silk cloth was tactile. Above that, 2 round objects, symbol, so that's sound. To the left of that was the conch shell with perfume, smell, and diagonally above a round object, a mirror, visual. So these are the 5 sense objects that are the most common form of distraction. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mikkel, I think you were next.
Thank you. Good morning. I might be moving ahead of us, but I don't know how to ask this question. Maybe it's just an observation I just wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
It just seems that it's like shamatha is like a training for a marathon. I'm asking, in a sense that, have you ever seen people like fall through the stages quite fast? Because I'm getting the sense that it's really like carving out a path. Like my excitation or like, emotional, mental energies I hold in my body, old stuff I have to work through, tightening things sitting in my body related to different kind of energies and history of my
Sure.
past, things like that.
Sure.
So it just seems like am I getting it right if I'm thinking like shamatha is like, working on all of it, and all of that will then manifest in deepening these stages along the way, but it will have to take a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to say here, but I'll try and be brief. Is of course we all start from a different point. And if we're using the analogy of a marathon, then of course some people are naturally more athletic and would need less preparation to be effectively running a marathon, where others are not so, and maybe they have overweight issues or health issues, and so they may need a lot of time to achieve the same goal. So similarly in mental training is we all have different levels. And also, of course, in terms of training, even for a marathon, if you have good conditions, good coach, good all these things, you can prepare much more quickly. So similarly in training the mind, if you have good in conditions, you have a qualified teacher who can guide you closely and all that, then of course. And the same, if you can, like for a marathon, if you can dedicate all your time to training rather than if you've got a busy job and you can only do a little bit of training each weekend, of course, that's going to take a lot longer time. So we can use the analogy of preparing for a marathon, is a lot of parallels here as well. But one other thing I just wanted to mention is that, and we're going to see this much more in the coming retreats as well, is that if we want to really progress well in shamatha, we need to have an integrated approach. That if we neglect the other areas of practice, which we're going to cover, the compassion and the vipassana, if we neglect those, you're going to find much more difficult. So if you want to have a healthy diet and the 3 main food groups, if you only eat one food group, that's not very healthy, is it? You need to eat all 3 food groups to have a healthy diet. Similarly, if you want to progress well in shamatha, you need to practice compassion, you need to practice vipassana, because they are going to support the shamatha practice, because you're going to face many difficulties in shamatha training, which we've probably already seen already. A lot of those difficulties, some are external, a lot of them are self-created, and a lot of them we're creating because of our distorted view, because of our anger, because of our frustration, our mental afflictions. How we subdue those mental afflictions is through the compassion practice and the vipassana practice. So if we're engaging in those practices, not in the same meditation, but if we're also engaging in those practices, we're going to subdue those inner obstacles that cause problems in terms of progressing in shamatha. So that's another factor, because sometimes what people do is they go, oh, I'm going to do shamatha. So they go into some intensive retreat in shamatha and nothing happens, or they completely collapse. One is because they're not really ready for that anyway. And two, they're neglecting all these other areas that are important. They're not having a very holistic approach, an integrated approach. So these are, that's why I think I mentioned in the blurb for these retreats, is that all these three areas of practice, even though we're bringing them individually, shamatha, compassion, vipassana, that if we really want to be effective in any one of those three areas, we need to practice all three. Because if we only practice one of them in isolation and we don't do the other two, we're cutting ourselves short. So that's sort of the short answer. A lot more to say about that. So we'll maybe leave it there. I think someone else has got a quick question before we have a break.
Hi, Glenn.
Hi.
It's Jody here.
Jody,
Appreciate
yes.
the clarity and structure that you're bringing to
Sure.
this session. Thank you. My question is just around, sometimes I have a feeling of tension in my temples when I'm doing mindfulness practices. And I'm just wondering, in your view, is it okay to continue to do the meditation, you know, try to relax and just almost use it as an objective of mindfulness? Or do you think it's better to actually stop the practice when that tension appears?
Yeah. I was going to address that a little bit in the next session, I think. Next session already, or this afternoon session, but I'll address it briefly now anyway, is, again, relaxation is important. And, you know, it's possible to have some quite good stability, clarity with tension. It's possible, but it comes at a big cost. So particularly the practice that we're about to do shortly, the nostrils practice in the next session, is if we're focusing here with a lot of tension, and then we can have, as you said, maybe temples, we have a lot of sensations across the forehead, maybe around the back of the neck, tension, but we're focused. And then people go, oh, I'm focused. And they keep going, keep going, keep going. That's not a good habit. So even though we're maybe very well focused, if we notice a lot of tension, then we need to release that. Release, release, release. And if you can't release it, then don't stay here at the nostrils. Go back down into the abdomen or full body and relax, relax, relax. And if you still can't relax, then last resort is stop the meditation, because we don't want to continue to develop the bad habit of tension. We've already done that enough in our life. We're trying to overcome that. But I'll talk more about that a little bit later today. So that's the short answer. Okay.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Jody. Okay, I think it's time for a morning tea break, or an afternoon tea break, depending on where you are in the world. So let's have a break now, and we'll come back in about 25 minutes for the next session, where we're going to go to the third variation of the breath practice, that is focusing at the entrance of the nostrils.